She demanded a party for her miracle, so I planned one to ensure her downfall. This is that story. Subscribe for your daily dose of revenge, so you never miss a story. My name is Grace Callahan. My sister Chloe stood before me in the sun-drenched garden of our family home, her hand resting possessively on her rounding belly, a picture of smug maternal grace. She looked at me, at my empty arms, at the grief I wore like a second skin, and she smiled a slow, pitying smile. She dared to say, "Some women just aren't meant to be mothers, Grace. It's a natural selection, really, but don't worry, I'll make sure this baby knows its auntie." She thought she was being profound, a cruel goddess of destiny, delivering a final, merciful verdict on my failed womanhood. She thought she was breaking me. She didn't realize that in that moment, she wasn't just announcing a pregnancy, she was signing the terms of her own public and permanent undoing. She didn't realize she was handing a weapon to a woman who had just discovered she had nothing left to lose. For 3 years, my life was a sterile cycle of waiting rooms, hormone injections, and the quiet clinical hum of ultrasound machines. My husband, Mark, and I poured our hearts, our hopes, and our entire life savings into the cold, unforgiving machinery of IVF. Each failed cycle was a small death, a fresh layer of grief that settled deep in my bones. The clinic, with its soft lighting and hushed sympathetic voices, began to feel like a beautiful, expensive torture chamber. Our last samples at the clinic, frozen in a canister of liquid nitrogen, weren't just science. They were our last chance, 2 viable embryos, the last 2 lottery tickets to the life we had dreamed of. After the last implantation failed, we were emotionally and financially shattered. We made the difficult decision to leave the remaining embryo frozen, to give ourselves time to heal, to breathe, before we could face the possibility of one final, ultimate heartbreak. It was our secret, a tiny frozen spark of hope stored away for a future we weren't sure we could even face. Chloe announced her miracle. My younger sister, Chloe, the golden child, the one for whom everything in life had always come so easily. She gathered the family, her face glowing with a radiant, triumphant joy. She was pregnant. After years of watching my struggle, of offering her cloying, pitying sympathy, she had achieved with effortless ease the one thing I wanted more than life itself. Our family was ecstatic. My parents wept with joy. Mark, my dear, heartbroken Mark, put on a brave face and hugged her. His smile's a brittle, painful thing. And I had to smile. I had to play the part of the happy, supportive sister while my own hope, the tiny frozen spark in that canister, died a quiet, agonizing death inside me. The party they threw for her was a special kind of hell. It was at our family's grand estate, the house I grew up in. Chloe was the center of it all, a pregnant Madonna in a flowing white dress, her hand resting constantly, possessively, on her rounding belly. She basked in the attention, her eyes shining with a self-satisfied glee. And every time she looked at me, I saw it. A flicker of something dark and triumphant in her gaze. It was a look I didn't understand then, a look I dismissed as my own grief-fueled paranoia. Now I know it for what it was, the look of a thief admiring her stolen treasure. I remember watching her, a glass of champagne I couldn't drink in my hand, and feeling a sense of profound cosmic injustice. She had everything. And now she had this too, the one thing I would have given my soul for. The lie she told was as simple as it was monstrous. She and her husband, she claimed, had also been struggling with infertility, a secret she had kept to avoid worrying the family. And then a miracle, a natural, spontaneous pregnancy, a 1 in a million chance, a gift from God. They all bought it. They wept for her secret struggle. They marveled at her miracle. And I, the barren sister, the cautionary tale, was expected to lead the applause. The performance I gave that day was the greatest of my life. I smiled, I hugged her, I touched her belly, and spoke of my happiness for her. Every word was a lie. Every smile was a mask. And every moment I spent in her triumphant, radiant presence felt like I was being buried alive. The turning point, the moment the first crack appeared in the beautiful, elaborate facade of her lie, arrived in a plain white envelope. It started, as most catastrophic discoveries do, with a piece of paper, a simple billing error. It was a quarterly storage invoice from the fertility clinic. I almost threw it away unopened. The sight of the clinic's logo, a familiar pang of grief. But I opened it, my eyes scanning the line items with a numb, detached familiarity. Annual cryopreservation fee, specimen storage. And then I saw it. A line item I had never seen before. Embryo thaw and transfer procedure, August 14th, and a corresponding charge for several $1,000s. My blood went cold. August 14th. I had been in another state on August 14th, at a conference for work. Mark had been with me. There had been no transfer. It had to be a mistake. A simple clerical error. I called the clinic, my voice tight with the confusion I was trying to keep from turning into panic. I spoke to a flustered administrator in the billing department. She pulled up my file. "Oh," she said, her voice full of a nervous uncertainty. "I see. It says here the transfer was authorized by you. We have the signed consent form on file. You came in on the 14th. "No," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "I did not. I was 1,000 miles away. There has been a mistake." "Well," she stammered, "the form is signed, a Grace Callahan, and the photo ID on file was checked." Photo ID signed form. A cold, hideous dread began to creep up my spine. It was a feeling so monstrous, so unthinkable, that my mind refused to form the thought. I hung up the phone. I sat there in the quiet of my home office, the invoice trembling in my hand. It was impossible, and yet. That night, I did something I had never done before. I hired a private investigator, an expensive, discreet professional who specialized in cases of fraud and identity theft. I felt insane, paranoid. I was chasing a ghost, a billing error, a wild, unbelievable suspicion. But the cold dread in my gut, the flicker of triumph I had seen in my sister's eyes, would not let me rest. I gave the investigator everything: the invoice, the date, the name of the clinic, and the name of my sister. The PI's report arrived a week later in a plain manila envelope that he handed to me in the anonymity of a dimly lit parking garage. I didn't open it right away. I sat in my car for a long time, the envelope a toxic, radioactive thing on the passenger seat beside me. A part of me didn't want to know. A part of me wanted to drive home, burn the envelope, and go back to the simple, understandable grief I had been living with. But I couldn't. I had to know. I turned on the dome light, my hands shaking, and I tore it open. The report was clinical, cold, and utterly, completely devastating. It was a timeline of a monstrous betrayal laid out in black and white. There were security camera stills. A woman, her face partially obscured by a hat and sunglasses, but her build, her hair, her gait, all unmistakably Chloe's, entering the clinic on the morning of August 14th. There was a copy of the consent form for the embryo transfer. The signature, Grace Callahan, was a near-perfect forgery of my own. My sister had spent our entire childhood practicing my signature, a game we used to play, a game she had now used to steal my future. There was a copy of the fake ID she had used, a driver's license with her picture but my name, a clumsy but effective forgery. And there was the sworn, tearful affidavit from the clinic intern who had been on duty that day, a young, inexperienced girl who remembered the other Mrs. Callahan. She remembered Chloe, posing as me, claiming she had decided to go through with the transfer spontaneously, that her husband was out of town, that she wanted to surprise him. The intern, eager to please, had not followed proper protocol. She had not cross-referenced the photo on the ID with the one in my digital file. She had simply believed the lie. She had handed my baby, my last hope, to my sister. The final page of the report was a simple one-line summary. Conclusion: the evidence strongly indicates that Chloe Miller, using forged documents and a false identity, fraudulently authorized and received the embryo transfer of client Grace Callahan on August 14th. I stared at the words, at the cold, hard, irrefutable proof. She didn't just get pregnant. She didn't just have a miracle. She had planned my destruction. She had impersonated me, forged my name, and stolen the last remnant of my hope from a freezer, and had it implanted in her own womb. The baby she was carrying, the baby my family was celebrating as a miracle, was my biological child, and my husband's. My grief, the dull, heavy cloak I had been wearing for years, was suddenly, violently ripped away, and underneath it was not just anger. It was something colder, something purer, something far more dangerous. It was a rage so profound, so absolute, it was clarifying. The world, which had been a gray fog of sadness, snapped into a sharp, terrible focus. The victim I had been for so long died in that car, and in her place, a strategist, a hunter, a woman with nothing left to lose and a singular, all-consuming purpose, was born. She thought she had stolen my child. She had no idea she had just given birth to a monster. Her monster, me. I sat in the cold, sterile silence of my car for a long time. The PI's report a toxic, radioactive thing on the passenger seat beside me. The grief, the dull, heavy cloak I had been wearing for years, was suddenly, violently ripped away, and underneath it was not just anger. It was something colder, something purer, something far more dangerous. It was a rage so profound, so absolute, it was clarifying. The world, which had been a gray fog of sadness, snapped into a sharp, terrible focus. The victim I had been for so long died in that car, and in her place, a strategist, a hunter, a woman with nothing left to lose and a singular, all-consuming purpose, was born. She thought she had stolen my child. She had no idea she had just given birth to a monster. Her monster, me. My first instinct, a primal, guttural urge, was to drive to her house, to hammer on her door, to throw the evidence of her monstrous betrayal at her feet, and watch her perfect, lying face crumble. But I crushed that instinct with a cold, brutal efficiency. A confrontation would be a release for her. It would allow her to cry, to play the victim, to spin a new web of lies. It would be messy, emotional, and ultimately unsatisfying. She had orchestrated a quiet, clinical theft of my future. My response had to be equally quiet, equally clinical, and infinitely more devastating. She wanted an audience for her miracle pregnancy. She craved the attention, the adoration, the public spectacle of her triumph. Very well, I would give her an audience. I would give her the biggest, most adoring audience imaginable, and then, in front of all of them, I would burn her world to the ground. Telling Mark was the first, most difficult step. He was a good man, a kind man, and his heart was just as broken as mine had been. He had been living in a quiet, resigned grief, trying to be strong for me, trying to accept our childless future. I knew this truth would shatter him all over again, in a new and more horrifying way. I waited until late that night. I laid the PI's report out on our dining room table, the stark black and white photos, the forged signatures, the damning affidavit, all arranged like pieces of a puzzle that formed a picture of pure evil. He came into the room, a worried look on his face. "Grace, what's all this?" I didn't speak. I just pointed to the first page. He picked it up, his brow furrowed in confusion. I watched him as he read. I watched as his confusion slowly, sickeningly, morphed into dawning horror. I saw his hands begin to shake. I saw the color drain from his face, leaving him looking pale and stricken. He sank into a chair, the papers fluttering from his nerveless fingers. "No," he whispered, his voice a ragged, broken sound. "No, it's not possible. Chloe wouldn't. She couldn't." "She did," I said, my voice devoid of any emotion. It was a simple, terrible fact. He looked at me then, his eyes wide with a pain that mirrored my own. But as he looked at my face, at the cold, hard resolve in my eyes, I saw his grief begin to change. The heartbreak, the disbelief. It began to curdle, to harden into the same icy rage that now lived in my own heart. He had been betrayed just as deeply as I had. The child she was carrying was his, a son or a daughter he thought he would never have, now growing in the womb of a woman who had stolen him. "What are we going to do?" he asked, his voice low, trembling with a fury he was struggling to contain. "We are not going to do anything," I said calmly. "Not yet. We are going to play a part. I am going to be the most supportive, most loving, most doting sister and aunt-to-be this family has ever seen." I looked at him, my eyes locking with his. "And you are going to be the proud, supportive brother-in-law. We are going to help her plan the most beautiful, most public, most celebrated gender reveal party this family has ever witnessed. We are going to give her everything she wants." He stared at me, a dawning understanding in his eyes. He saw the new woman sitting across from him. He saw the strategist, the hunter. "And then," he whispered. A slow, cold smile touched my lips. "And then," I said, "we are going to take it all away." The performance began the next day. I became a ghost of my former self, playing the part of the grieving but supportive sister with an Oscar-worthy devotion. I called Chloe, my voice full of a bright, manufactured cheerfulness. I apologized for being so distant, blaming it on my own grief. She, of course, lapped it up, her voice full of that same cloying, false sympathy she had always used. "Oh, Grace, of course I understand," she'd said. "It must be so hard for you. I'm just so glad you're feeling better." I began to help her. I became her confidant, her planner, her biggest cheerleader. And the centerpiece of our planning was the gender reveal party. It was her idea, of course. She wanted a grand affair, a public celebration of her miracle. I encouraged it. I nurtured it. I helped her shape it into the perfect stage for her own destruction. "We should have it at the family estate," I suggested. "It's big enough for everyone. We can have it catered. We can make it a really special, memorable day for the whole family." "We should have a big screen," I suggested a week later. "We could play a slideshow of family photos, of you and your husband as kids. It would be so sentimental, so moving." She loved every idea. She was so consumed by her own arrogance, so blinded by her own triumph, that she never saw the trap being laid around her. She saw my help not as a threat, but as a validation of her own victory. She had not only stolen my baby, she had won back my devotion. She thought I was a beaten dog, returning to lick the hand that had struck it. She had no idea I was a viper, coiling, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. While I was playing the part of the doting sister, I was also assembling my army. My first stop was my lawyer's office. I laid out the PI's report. My lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman with a taste for blood, looked at the evidence, her eyes widening with a kind of horrified professional glee. "This is not just fraud, Grace," she'd said, her voice a low, excited hum. "This is assault. This is a level of premeditated, malicious intent that I have rarely seen. We can destroy her." We began to prepare the legal assault. We filed for an emergency, preemptive court order, demanding a DNA test of the child immediately upon its birth. We prepared a multi-million-dollar lawsuit against Chloe, citing fraud, identity theft, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. We also prepared a lawsuit against the clinic for their gross negligence. And most importantly, we got a sworn, videotaped confession from the clinic intern, a terrified young woman who, when faced with the threat of losing her license and being named as a co-conspirator, told us everything. My second stop was a journalist. I had a contact, a well-known investigative reporter with a national reputation for breaking stories about medical ethics and scandals. I met her in a quiet, anonymous coffee shop. I didn't give her my name. I presented myself as an anonymous tipster, a concerned party with knowledge of a horrifying case of fertility fraud. I gave her just enough of the story, just enough of the evidence to whet her appetite. I told her the full explosive details would be revealed at a private family event on a specific date. I told her to be ready. She gave me her card, her eyes glittering with the thrill of a career-making story. My war room was my home office. The walls were covered not with baby announcements, but with a timeline of Chloe's deceit. The PI's report, the forged documents, the legal filings, the transcripts of the intern's confession, a calendar with the date of the gender reveal party circled in a thick blood-red marker. I watched Chloe's social media, a nauseating feed of her miracle pregnancy, photos of her smiling, her hand on her belly, posts about her unbelievable journey and the power of faith. Each post was a fresh wave of fuel on the fire of my cold, calculated rage. She was building her own legend, her own myth, and I was preparing the truth that would burn it all to ash. The day of the party arrived, a perfect sun-drenched Saturday in late September. The stage was set, the audience was assembled. My team, the lawyer, the investigator, the journalist, were all on standby. I stood in front of the mirror in my childhood bedroom, the same room where Chloe and I had once shared secrets and dreams. I was wearing a simple, elegant navy blue dress. I looked calm, I looked serene. I looked like a woman on her way to celebrate her sister's greatest joy. But when I looked into my own eyes, I saw a stranger, a woman I had never met before. A woman forged in the fires of the deepest betrayal imaginable. She was a woman who had lost everything, and therefore had nothing left to fear. She was a woman on her way to a reckoning, and she was ready. The gender reveal party was a masterpiece of idyllic deception, a perfect stage for the ugliest of truths. The sprawling gardens of my family's estate were bathed in the warm, golden light of a late September afternoon. White tents had been erected on the manicured lawns, tables were draped in crisp linen, and champagne flowed like water. The air was filled with the scent of roses from my mother's prize-winning garden and the cheerful, oblivious laughter of 100 friends and family members. At the center of it all was Chloe, my sister, the radiant, triumphant mother-to-be. She was wearing a flowing pale blue dress, a color chosen to subtly hint at her own hopes for a boy. Her hand never left her belly. She moved through the adoring crowd, a beatific smile plastered on her face, accepting hugs, congratulations, and fawning compliments on her miraculous glow. She was the queen of this garden party, the star of a show whose script she thought she knew by heart. Mark and I arrived together, playing our parts to perfection. He was the proud, supportive brother-in-law, his smile tight but convincing. I was the doting sister, my own grief finally healed enough to fully celebrate hers. I carried a beautifully wrapped gift, and my face was a mask of serene, loving support. I could feel the pitying, sympathetic glances from some of the guests. Poor Grace, their eyes said. It must be so hard for her, but she's being so brave. Brave had nothing to do with it. I was a general walking onto a battlefield of my own choosing. I scanned the crowd, my eyes cool and analytical. I saw my lawyer, Miss Davies, standing near the back, dressed as a guest, a friend of a friend, her expression neutral, her sharp eyes missing nothing. I saw the investigative journalist I had tipped off, mingling near the catering tent, her phone discreetly recording, her presence a quiet, ticking time bomb. My army was in place. Chloe saw me and rushed over, enveloping me in a cloud of her expensive floral perfume. "Grace, I'm so glad you're here," she gushed, her voice a little too loud, a little too bright. "Isn't it all just perfect?" "It's beautiful, Chloe," I said, my voice smooth as glass. "You deserve a perfect day." She beamed, completely oblivious to the double meaning, to the cold, hard fury behind my serene smile. She was so consumed by her own triumph, so high on the adoration of the crowd, that she was utterly, beautifully blind. The party continued, a slow, agonizing buildup of anticipation. There were games, there were speeches. My father gave a tearful, heartfelt toast to his 2 beautiful daughters, and the joy of his expanding family. I had to clench my fists under the table to keep from screaming. Finally, the moment arrived. The main event. A massive, ornate cake was wheeled out onto the lawn. The inside was colored either pink or blue, and Chloe and her husband were to cut it together to reveal the gender of my child. Chloe and her husband stood by the cake, beaming, holding a large silver knife together. The crowd gathered around, their phones held aloft, ready to capture the moment. The air was thick with a joyful, expectant silence. The plan had been for my father to say a few words before the cutting, but I had spoken to him earlier, telling him that I felt strong enough, that I wanted to do it, that I wanted to give a special toast to my sister, as a sign that I had finally, truly made peace with my own journey. He had agreed, his eyes shining with pride at my bravery. So as Chloe stood there, basking in the spotlight, I walked to the small microphone that had been set up. I took it from the stand, my hand perfectly steady. "Hi, everyone," I began, my voice clear and calm, carrying across the silent, smiling crowd. "For those of you who don't know me, I'm Grace, Chloe's older sister." I smiled, a warm, familiar smile that put everyone at ease. I just wanted to say a few words before the big reveal. I turned to my sister. She was looking at me, her eyes shining with what looked like love, but what I knew was triumphant pity. "Chloe," I said, my voice soft, "we've all been on such a journey with you. Your pregnancy has been called a miracle, and it is a true, honest-to-God miracle." I paused, letting the words hang in the air. But miracles, I've learned, can be complicated, and sometimes the stories we tell about them aren't the whole story. A flicker of confusion crossed Chloe's face. The crowd murmured, a low, uncertain sound. "I know we're all here to find out the gender of this precious baby," I continued, my voice never wavering. "But before we cut the cake, I thought it might be nice to share a little bit of the real story of how this miracle came to be. I've put together a little slideshow." I gestured to the large white projection screen that I had helpfully insisted on renting for the party, the one that was supposed to be for a sentimental slideshow of family photos. If you could all just turn your attention to the screen for a moment. With a discreet click of the remote in my hand, the screen flickered to life. The first image that appeared was not a baby photo. It was a high-resolution scan of a document, stark and clinical. It was the consent form from the fertility clinic for the embryo transfer on August 14th. And next to it, blown up for all to see, were two signatures: my real, elegant signature from my patient file, and the clumsy, forged Grace Callahan from the transfer form. They were similar, but they were not the same. A gasp went through the crowd. I saw my father take a step forward, his face a mask of utter confusion. Chloe had gone rigid, her hand frozen on the cake knife, her smile gone, replaced by a look of dawning, wide-eyed horror. Before anyone could speak, the image on the screen changed. It was now a video. The face was blurred, but the voice was clear, trembling with fear and shame. It was the clinic intern. I didn't check the file photo," her recorded voice confessed, echoing across the silent, horrified garden. She had an ID with the right name. She said her husband was out of town, and she wanted to surprise him. I didn't think. I'm so sorry." Chloe made a sound, a small, strangled gasp. She looked at me, her eyes wild with a panic so profound it was a pleasure to behold. But I wasn't finished. The screen changed again. The final image was another document, stark and official, stamped with the seal of the county court. It was the emergency court order, preemptively filed by my lawyer, compelling Chloe Miller to submit her child for a DNA test immediately upon its birth to confirm its parentage. The trap was now fully, completely, and publicly sprung. I raised the microphone to my lips one last time. I turned to my sister, to the woman who had smiled in my face while she stole my last hope. "The cake, I believe, is blue," I said, my voice as cold and as clear as ice. "This baby is indeed a boy, a biological son of my husband, Mark, and of me, Grace Callahan." I let that sink in, let the full weight of the words crush her. But he is not Chloe's son by right. He is the product of fraud, identity theft, and a betrayal so heinous, so monstrous, it will now be exposed to the world. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of 100 people simultaneously realizing they were standing in the middle of a horror story. And then the silence shattered. Chloe shrieked. It was not a human sound. It was a raw, animalistic scream of pure, undiluted terror and exposure. Her carefully constructed world, her perfect miracle, her entire identity, had just been detonated in front of everyone she knew. Her legs gave out, and she collapsed to the ground in a heap of pale blue silk, her body convulsing with ugly, gasping sobs. The crowd erupted. There were shouts, screams, people turning on each other, turning on my parents, who stood frozen in a state of catatonic shock. I saw the journalist I had contacted, her face a mask of grim professional focus, her phone held high, recording everything. Mark was beside me, his face a storm of disgust and horror, his eyes fixed on the pathetic, weeping figure of my sister on the ground. He put a protective arm around me. I looked at the scene I had created, the chaos, the ruin, the beautiful, perfect, and absolute destruction of the woman who had tried to destroy me. I felt no joy, no triumph, just a profound, quiet, and deeply satisfying sense of justice, a sense of order finally, blessedly restored. I turned my back on the chaos, on the weeping, on the wreckage of my family. Mark and I walked away, through the stunned, parting crowd, leaving the party, leaving that life behind us. The war was over, and the right person had won. The chaos I left behind in that sun-drenched garden was, I was told later, a thing of terrible, chaotic beauty. The party, a celebration of a life that was a lie, devolved into a maelstrom of accusations, hysterics, and shattered relationships. My parents were engulfed by the shame of it, forced to face the monstrous reality of what one of their daughters had done to the other. The family name, which they held so dear, was now irrevocably tainted by a scandal so sordid, so deeply personal, it was the stuff of whispered legend. The police arrived, called by a guest who had witnessed Chloe's physical collapse and the ensuing pandemonium. The journalist I had contacted had her story, a story that would soon be splashed across news sites, a salacious tale of suburban privilege and monstrous betrayal. The perfect, idyllic facade of our family had been ripped away, exposing the rot and decay beneath. My last image of the party was of Chloe, a weeping, pathetic heap on the manicured lawn, being helped into a car by her equally stunned and horrified husband. Her reign as the miraculous, triumphant mother-to-be was over. Her new life, a life of consequences, was just beginning. The legal fallout was swift and brutal. My lawyer, Ms. Davies, was a shark who had been waiting for blood in the water, and now she had an ocean of it. The lawsuit we had prepared was filed the very next business day. It was an aggressive, multi-pronged assault. We sued Chloe for fraud, identity theft, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. We sued the fertility clinic for gross negligence, their failure to follow even the most basic identity verification protocols, a key component of our case. The clinic, facing a public relations nightmare and the threat of losing its license, settled almost immediately. The sum was substantial, enough to cover our legal fees and the immense cost of our failed IVF journey 100 times over. It was not about the money, but it was a quiet, satisfying admission of their guilt. Chloe's legal battle was longer, uglier, and far more public. The evidence was irrefutable. The forged documents, the intern's videotaped confession, the digital trail, it was an open and shut case. The court-ordered DNA test, conducted the day my son was born, confirmed what I already knew. He was mine. He was Mark's. He was a Callahan. Chloe was charged. The story of the fertility fraud scandal became a national headline, a lurid tale of sibling rivalry and unimaginable betrayal. She was no longer the tragic hero of her own story. She was the villain in mine. Her trial was short. She was found guilty on multiple counts. The last time I saw her, she was in a courtroom, her face pale and drawn. Her designer clothes replaced by a drab prison jumpsuit. Her arrogance was gone, replaced by the hollow, empty eyes of a woman who had lost everything because she could not stand to see her sister have anything. She was sentenced to several years in prison. Justice, in the end, was served. And the baby, my son? That was the most complicated, most painful part of this entire sordid affair. He was born healthy, a beautiful, perfect little boy with my husband's eyes and my father's smile. But he was born into a story of trauma and deceit. Mark and I, our hearts already so bruised and battered by years of loss, knew we were not in a place to raise a child born of such a monstrous act. We were broken, and we needed to heal. But he was our son, and he deserved a life of love, of peace, of stability. He deserved a home free from the ghosts of his conception. Mark's cousin and his wife, a wonderful, loving couple who had struggled with their own infertility for years, had been our rock through this entire ordeal. They loved our son from the moment they saw him. And so, in an act that was both the most painful and the most loving of our lives, we made a decision. We placed our son in their care through a formal, legal adoption. He would be raised by family. He would be raised with love. He would know who we were, and he would know his story when he was old enough to understand it. But he would be spared the darkness of its beginning. He would have the happy, normal, peaceful childhood that his mother, my sister, had tried to steal from all of us. The dust has settled now. The storm has passed. Mark and I sold the house, the one filled with too many ghosts, too many painful memories. We moved. We started over. We began our own adoption journey, a journey not of science and clinics, but of hope and paperwork and the quiet, steady belief that we could still build a family on a foundation of love, not loss. I look back on the woman I was, the grieving, broken woman who thought her life was over, and I barely recognize her. The fire of my grief didn't consume me. It forged me into something new, something stronger, something unbreakable. I learned that there is a power in pain, a clarity in rage. I learned that sometimes the only way to heal a wound is to cauterize it with a righteous, cleansing fire. She took my grief and tried to wear it as a victory. She tried to build her happiness on the foundation of my sorrow. But truth has a power all its own. In the end, she didn't steal a life from me. She only stole her own. She is a prisoner of her own making, haunted by the ghost of the child she could not keep and the sister she could not break. And I am free. This was about more than a stolen sample. It was about stolen trust, a betrayal at the deepest, most fundamental level. Have you ever had to expose a family member's lie to protect yourself? Share your story of reclaiming your power in the comments below. Let's create a community where that kind of strength is recognized and celebrated. The fight for ethical medical practices, for accountability in places of profound trust, is real. If you believe in that fight, if you believe in accountability, hit the like button and share this video to raise awareness. And finally, comment justice below if you believe Chloe got what she deserved. Thank you for listening. Thank you for letting me share my story.